Hello and welcome to Chapter 11 of the King's Indian Masterclass. Today we're looking at the Makogonov, which is the move h3 on move 5. And at first glance, this might look very mysterious. What's the idea? We'll get to that in a second. I do quickly want to remind you, as always, there's going to be a PGN file in the description in case you want to study these moves on your own. And with that, let's begin. So first of all, the basic idea for white. They want, even though it might not seem like it, to prepare the move g4. And white is going to try to meet fire with fire. Generally speaking, in the King's Indian, black attacks on the king side by means of f5, and white is basically forced into attacking on the queen side. But here, white is going to switch that and turn the tables on black because they're going for g4, and they're going to develop their pieces in the most strategical way when it comes to forming an effective attack. And that typically will mean an eventual h4 and h5 and so on, and white will just try to crash through. This is generally the idea with h3. Of course, they can go h3 and then just return to the general developing moves, but then h3 truly is just a waste of a tempo, and it's not going to be in any way something you need to worry about. The setup we're going to be focusing on is more so this idea of going for g4, the unique idea with the Makogonov. So we're going to begin by castling. Very simple. And here, white really needs to make a choice. There's a branching point here. So we're going to split the video into the two main moves. There's the move bishop g5, which is by far the most common. But in my opinion, it isn't actually the best, and it doesn't come with what I would think to be the best strategical idea in mind. Because when you go g4 and later h4, it's usually good to be able to play g5 and h5, and you want your pawns not to be obstructed, certainly not by your own pieces. And so the bishop on g5 won't serve as a very useful attacking piece, and in the end, it will actually only harm the attack that white is going to try to create. So bishop e3 is what I think is a bit more of a dangerous setup, where their point is to still go for g4 and h4, but now the bishop can still be attacking along this diagonal while not disturbing the white attack. So bishop e3 and bishop g5, the two moves we're going to cover. Now, there is one more important distinction between these two moves, because generally speaking, we can't go for our f5 break. We're going to instead play on the queen side. And that makes a lot of sense because this g4 idea, developing the knight, it takes a lot of time. So the king remains in the center. So by opening up on the queen side, we're going to put immediate pressure. And generally speaking, that's how you're going to fight the Makogonov. But there is, as I said, an important distinction. When the bishop's on g5, notice that the move e5 is not very easy to play because the bishop is immediately pinning the knight. So we're going to treat this almost like we treated the Averbach. If you recall, in the Averbach, we couldn't go e5. We first prepared it with knight a6 to defend over c7, so that after e5 takes, the move knight to d5 does not come with the same level of pressure because c7 is nicely guarded. So knight a6 is my recommendation, and in fact, you can use a lot of the things we talked about in the previous video with the Averbach against this Makogonov system with bishop g5, where we're still going to go for e5. If you recall, one of the big recommendations that I had when it comes to getting rid of this pin is to just slide the queen to e8. I said this was kind of the most effective square for the queen, and that remains true. The only difference here is that you're going to hurry a little bit more with your queenside attack, because if you slow play this position, then white could conceivably put some more pressure. So you want to be as quick, as efficient as possible. So first of all, a5, stopping b4, and then bishop to d7, and the idea immediately, we go b5. Then we take, and we just put the bishop here on a6. Notice that we're cutting along the king. One thing I do want to emphasize, this maneuver with the knight that you just saw, it might look weird, but this is actually one of the most important ideas for white in the Makogonov. The knight on f3 just doesn't actually serve a useful purpose. It's far better on g3, where it could help on h5 and f5 when the pawn rushes up the board. There's also very nice sacrificial ideas if the knight sacrifices itself to open up the g-file with the rook on g1, for example. So usually, white will play h3, g4, and once the pawn is already behind the knight, then you bring the knight in to the mix with knight to e2, knight to g3. So bishop a6, keeping the bishop on the board, and then maneuvering the knight over. And, you know, f6 here, black plays a little bit on the king side as well. But once again, the queen side is where black needs to focus their energy on. You're not going to be able to push on the king side like you typically do. Get that idea out of your mind. You need to focus on your queen side play instead. So takes, and queen to d8, offering the trade of the queens. We are now following a Rajabov game with the black side. And you can see that black is just playing very natural moves. They're, you know, stacking the rooks. This move here, I think, is also one of the most important moves of the position, because now white cannot make any progress if they don't take, but if they take, we just slide the king to h7 and use this pawn as actually a defender for us. So it's beneficial for that pawn to stay there. And you can see that black has extra pressure along the f-file. Their pieces are far more active than the counterparts, and for that reason, even down a pawn, black is better and is pushing for more. Eventually, Rajabov does find a bit more in this game by means of taking on f2 and then taking on c2, trading the bishops, and eventually transitioning into an endgame where if white played perfectly, they probably could have drawn, but it's already very difficult to do so because this pawn on g3 is just so strong. And eventually, white resigned because the knight is now going to aid the pawn into an inevitable promotion. Let's go all the way back to bishop g5. There's one more game to look at, but the ideas are going to be the same. So once again, we go knight a6 to prepare e5. And here, let's say they go knight f3. Well, we're still going to go for this e5 move. We still go for queen e8. The ideas, again, are the same. We go a5. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is that the move g3 was played instead of g4 for white. And they actually went for a little bit of a different system. This was more of the Fianchetto. So watching some of that video might be helpful when it comes to these sort of structures. But the basic idea tends to be the same, where we're going to play on the queen side, and that tends to lead to opportunities to take over also in the center or on the king side. For example, here the move knight e3 is simply very strong. And you can't even take the pawn on b2. I mean, you can, but then queen to b3 is quite annoying. The knight ends up actually being trapped. But that doesn't matter. You bring the knight back, you've completely misplaced the king, and that's going to be the story of this video. This king does not find shelter. When you go for these aggressive intentions with g4 and knight to g3, you can't castle kingside. I mean, if you do, that's a massive concession because you're saying, okay, my attack didn't work. But you also can't castle queenside because that's where we're throwing all of our eggs into that basket. We're completely attacking on the queen side. It's not going to be safe for that king to castle there either. So the king tends to be in the center, which is why white ended up allowing this knight d3 idea. They didn't really have a better option. So eventually, after some maneuvers, black is improving the placement of their pieces, and we transition into, once again, an endgame situation. You can see that black is better here. Again, the pieces for black are just much more active, and as long as you keep these pawns in check, there's not going to be any issues at all. And black infiltrates. Eventually, we trade the pieces off. And this sort of endgame, it's a very interesting one because black already made so much progress with their rook, and because they're up 2 pawns now, this is indeed winning. And indeed, you'll see that black has no problems when it comes to converting. You cut the king on along the second rank. The king is now completely stuck. And eventually, you form your pawns and your king in such a way to threaten some checkmates. They have to move their king, but now we promote to the queen, and it's completely over. So that's basically bishop g5. Not very scary. You can utilize the Averbach ideas with knight a6, e5, and queen to e8, and you want to just focus a little bit more on your attack on the queen side, be a bit more urgent with that attack, and things should generally be good. Bishop e3. This is what I consider to be the more serious attempt for white, because if you're not careful and you play, just random moves and you actually go for f5, for example, or just randomly try to go for e5, then they actually do get play. right? Now that the bishop is no longer stopping the pawn, once it reaches g5, the other pawn comes to h5, white gets a good amount of attacking momentum. So the way that we meet this is by immediately going e5. We no longer have that issue because the bishop's not on g5. That's the benefit for us. The bishop is less active here. And after they push, now we go a5. We're carving out space for us to once again completely take over the queenside, which is what we aim to do against the Makogonov. Now, moving the knight is typically a good option for a couple of reasons. It stops g5 coming with tempo, but again, it aims to, completely restructure our pieces in such a way for them to be effective queenside attackers. So c6, this is the main breakthrough you're going for, c6 and b5. You want the queenside breakthroughs to chip away at the pawns here and basically just create a mess on the queenside. And if you do that successfully, things will go well. Now, in this game that we're following, this was actually a Karu Nakamura with the black side. He did not do this very well. So I'll start by showing what he did with the black side. He went for this idea of pushing the pawn to a3. And although that's an interesting concept and something you could apply in certain contexts, the issue is white just gets a little bit too much play here. And you end up seeing that white gets a pretty massive attack. This is basically what white is going for. Now, in the game here, Caruana with the white side missed his only chance of g5, after which he's completely winning. He brought the queen back, and now all of the advantage is gone, and it's in fact black who is winning. And that is how, scary this system with black is. I mean, white has to play perfectly their attack, otherwise they're not getting anywhere. But still, this is not a perfect game from black because white had their chances, definitely. In the end, black did end up winning, but I want to go back here, and I instead want to look at the more effective approach. Because what was the issue in that game for black? They went c6, but they didn't double down later with b5 and completely open up this side of the board. They went for this kind of awkward approach of a4, a3. I recommend c6 and b5 as soon as possible. You do not want white to be able to breathe in these positions because if they do for too long, they're going to crush you on the king side. So let's go ahead and take a look at this game here. After knight ge2, we had the knight come in, and you can see that indeed b5 was played. This is what I was showing. Now white is going for their setup, but b4. And this is the effective way to meet this Makogonov with bishop e3, because white was never objectively better. They never had their chances in this game. Black completely takes over. There's already ideas of b3. You get the queen in with check. You get the rooks to the c file. Black's the one taking over in this game. White's attack is just too slow. And white actually realized this, and therefore they decided to castle. If they insisted on their attack by, let's say, going f3 here to support the h4 move without blundering g4, it just doesn't work well, right? b3 comes, bishop d2, and now you could even take here and then promote another queen. And the bishop is hit, the knight is coming in, the queen is hitting the pawn on b2. Game over. So you're too slow for this. So again, white castled out of the attack. But now it's just black who has the fun. White still tried to generate play on the king side. They have to. If they just leave their pawns here, then this was not, a strong idea for them to start with. They have to try to justify h3, g4, but it's not as effective. If they've already committed their king to this side of the board, if they open everything up here, their king is also going to lack some safety. But ultimately, that's not even very relevant to this situation because you don't even have to attack this king by waiting for them to open things up. You just crash through on the queen side once again. There's nothing they can do. And in fact, a couple moves ago even, after bishop takes c4, white resigned just to show you why. We have queen to c4, and here the simple rook a5 comes in. There's devastating effect. I mean, the pawn on d5 is lost. Then there's issues with the queen defending the knight. The knight is also pinned, and there's some ideas in some cases of rook c1. It's completely over. And ladies and gentlemen, that will wrap up the Makogonov with h3. As a quick overview and reminder, the main idea for white is the following. They want to go g4. They want to open up the king side and just go for an all-out attack. So we have to meet this by switching our game plan and playing instead on the queen side. What does that mean? We play e5 to solidify the pawn structure, and then we go for the breakthroughs with c6, with b5, with queen a5, with bishop d7, with knight a6, knight b4. We play on the queen side as quickly as possible and generate a situation where they no longer feel comfortable continuing to make progress with their attack because their queen side is completely collapsing. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're new around here. Like this video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.